Sure.
Okay. All right, let's get this one going, okay? Wesley, I'm having a wonderful chat with Portuguese Canadian clarinetist Wesley Ferreira about his 2022 Ravello Records CD release, Into the Green. And I saw this CD coming up. The cover design is impossible to ignore. There we go. See that, everybody? There you go. So I had to contact you and figure out what was going on, which is what I've done. So we're going to talk about this CD, again released in 2022. I guess recorded during the COVID shutdowns, 2020, 21, something like that.
Correct.
Yeah. This is a CD of mostly solo clarinet and electronics, for lack of any other way to describe it, as in a generic way, CD. And this CD, as I mentioned to you off camera, is an assemblage of composers I have never, ever, ever heard of. That's a wonderful thing. And they're all young. It's disgusting. So it's fabulous. And you do have Portuguese, this connection, and something is going on which describes your choices, aside from choosing all clarinetists, pretty much all clarinetists. You can't go wrong in terms of their understanding the instrument. Let me run by the names and compositions. Alexei Goroholinsky, I hope I've got that right, born somewhere in the 1980s. The piece is the first piece on the CD, and it's called, the title of the CD, Into the Green. We'll talk about it. Donald Stephen, born in 1945, the oldest of the crowd, I think. Sapphire Song. Nikola Razanovich, a piece titled Alt.Music.Ballistics. Hilarious. Three wonderful little movements. A Matter of Facts. What a tongue-in-cheek play on words. A soliloquy. Nice. And a Balkan dance that is, hard not to get up and dance around and do a little dervish about. Derek Bermel, born in 1967. Thracian Sketches. I almost lost my dentures on that one. Thracian Sketches. A very interesting piece. Gergely Vajda, born in 1973. Light, Shadows, Trembling. What? Amazing. Frederick Högberg, trying to get those umlauts, born in 1971. Invisible Duet. Fascinating. With, again, clarinet and electronics. And the last piece, Serban Nikifors, born in 1954. Carnix, a I have a note here that says he's a Romanian composer, cellist, and music educator. We'll deal with all of that. Okay, now about you. Um, of course, you've been performing worldwide as a soloist, an orchestral and chamber musician, and all of that good stuff. Adjudicator, clinician, part of the renowned faculty at Colorado State University, School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And I want everybody to take note of that. School of Music, Theater, and Dance. We'll talk about that later. People involved in that kind of wonderful mixed media, really get, you can't just be a musician if you're a faculty member of music, theater, and dance, and we'll talk about that. Colorado State University School of Music, Theater, and Dance is in Fort Collins, Colorado, where you may maintain, of course, a big clarinet studio. You're co-founder and artistic director of the Lift Clarinet Academy. We'll talk about that. Remind me when we start to get into details. It's a summer music festival and training institute. Attracts students from all around the world with innovative teaching methods. And that always sounds, innovative teaching methods, until I saw some of your videos. And now I have a feeling they are really innovative teaching methods at that summer academy. So that's going to be interesting. And then there's this idea that I really want you to talk about, this development of breath support training program for musicians. Air Revelation. What a clever name for an idea, a concept, a wellness, I presume, process for musicians. Let's see, it integrates pedagogy, psychology, and philosophy. And anytime I see those kind of things coming up, I go, ooh, this is going to be juicy. Wesley develops self-confidence in his students in all those ways. So that, if we can, we're going to, I think, why don't we do that right now? Let's talk right now. Let's start with just the backstory stuff. tell me about your Portuguese ancestry, coming to Canada, what that was, being in a Portuguese community in Canada, and how that affected you as a musician.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for taking this interview with me and taking interest in Into the Green, this new album, and in my career. So to talk a little bit about myself, I grew up in a Portuguese community in Canada. I mean, all of my family, parents, aunts, uncles immigrated from Portugal. And within the community in Canada that I grew up in, there were thousands and thousands of Portuguese immigrants there. And they brought their customs and their flavors, their restaurants, the bakeries, just everything, and to Canada. And so I grew up in that community, partaking in the music and the customs, and so it's very much a part of my upbringing, and very much a part of actually my musical soul. And of all the projects that I've undertaken now as a professional, several include either an ode to or directly the music from Portugal, the music that I grew up with. So I feel a strong connection, of course, there continued.
And you have that in some of your earlier CDs, I think. What are we at here about? Is this CD number 7, I think?
This is number 9.
Number 9.
That's right.
Wow. And as I glanced over some of your earlier CDs, on your website, some do specifically speak to Portuguese music, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Music for Portuguese. I don't know if you know this, but I'm taking a group of just, musicians my age and stuff to Portugal next June. And we've been only been trying for about 4 years. The plague kind of threw a wrench at things. But as a result, I've been really becoming involved in the history of Portuguese music, in this case classical music, but just the whole thing.
You'll enjoy
the whole culture. Yeah, so it's going to be wonderful. So with that in mind, how come? Who stuck a clarinet in your face? What did that have to do with anything?
So within the Portuguese communities, there's a tradition in Portugal. And also in other countries, Spain, Italy, some people might be more familiar with those cultures, of having community or civic bands, bandas filarmónicas it's called. And so every town or city will have their community band. And that was a very important part of my family. And so in Canada, this community also started a band. And that's how I started playing music. Was within these bandas filarmónicas. My father was a saxophonist, is a saxophonist, and so he wanted to teach me. He wanted to teach me music, and so he really loved the clarinet. And so he brought home a clarinet for me to start learning, and it didn't take very long for me to take to it. And
really, it took me a long time. I hated it.
Right, you mentioned that you were
at age 10 and 11, it was like most kids, it's like, oh, bore me, I'd rather go outside,
Sure.
But anyway, it's just me. I stuck with clarinet right up till about age 16 when I decided conducting was easier. So anyway, go ahead.
Sure.
But clarinet, in any other instruments, how we always in winds kind of fool around.
I actually played the organ in my community church. Oof. In the Portuguese church, I played the organ, and then, part of the culture of playing in these bandas filarmónicas was to, sometimes pick up another instrument to play. Now all the music in the bandas filarmónicas is reading music, sheet music, and but sometimes we would go off book and just start playing melodies and folk tunes, exactly, to jam.
Wow.
And so then I would pick up maybe different instruments, the saxophone, the trumpet, and those type of things.
And by the way, in my mind is a memory of Barcelona when I was a college kid. The community band was played. It was a Sunday in the huge park in Barcelona, and they'd stick you with a sticker to get on your shirt to get a couple pennies or something, to get a little contribution to the band. But what a tradition indeed. Yeah. And that sound.
Oh, sure.
In Spain anyway, and I'm sure in Portugal as well. That band sound. Maybe it's changed a bit these days, but still had, what I mean? That oboe bassoon sound. That's a little funky.
Yeah, I know where you're getting at, and it's a unique color. And I will say the first 2 professional albums that I put out was me as conductor. It was a project I put together called the Portuguese Heritage Band Project.
Oh,
And so there are two albums, both called Across the Ocean, the music of Bandas
nice.
Filarmónicas. And so if anyone were to go to my website, they could get access to it, enter my name and maybe conductor or Portuguese bandas in a Google search, and these albums would come up. And really what I was aiming for with those projects, and now 12 years ago, was to record quite literally, but also in a historical context, to record the music that we played.
That is a
we
great.
played in these bands, and so
that's what those
all
two
the
CDs
original
are?
music, exactly, all the original music of these bandas, and you really hear the different color and the different sounds as compared to maybe say a wind band that you might come to expect.
British or American wind band. It's a completely different timbre, really.
Absolutely.
And something folkloric about maybe the whatever.
Certainly, yeah. And the
training
music really leans into the folkloric aspect, or the folk music aspect of the culture. Absolutely.
And this will all go up on performingartsreview.net. Your page for this CD, links, videos. I've been watching a couple of you playing some of this music on the CD and so on. So I'm going to see if I can track down some of that band music. That'll be fun. And by the way, we talked a little bit, but I couldn't help but notice that the session producer is Copper Ferreira, and you have informed me. Thank you. I wasn't sure what that's a non whatever genus first name, but Copper Ferreira is your wife. Wonderful.
Yes, that's right, and she's the session producer on this album, Into the Green.
Why don't you feel funny just staying in a whole world of clarinetists? I mean, what's going on here? Your wife's a clarinetist, your friends are clarinetists, what?
Yeah, I think that's a natural thing, but I will say this, that I think, one of the parts of being, I think an artist or a musician is, at least for me, is to continue to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the music, or into the intricacies of the music, and in my case, of the clarinet. What's possible on the clarinet, and so maybe that's a product of that.
Yeah, and speaking of what's possible on the clarinet, I think I told you I've been sorry the traffic's going by, but I've been listening to a lot of clarinet CDs lately for some reason. They're coming at me, and so I am well aware of all the, and I'm a clarinetist in my youth, of all the yummy stuff, the effects. And as we deal with some of these specific pieces, I'll throw probably idiot questions at you so that you can help explain how some of these effects work. But this CD is brilliant, and there's a brilliant as in execution, tight, clean, intonation, all of that. The recording quality is fabulous, don't you think?
Yeah, I'm really quite proud of all the work that went into making it possible.
And as I say to many people, I mean, when it's that clean and clear, and you understand clearly that it's a clarinet sound, there is nothing in between. No, you know what I'm trying to say? Just fabulous. So that leads me to your new Silmer. Is this recording your new instrument? Your new, what do you call it? Your new signature design or something?
It was a project with Selmer Paris, the great instrument maker in France, historic instrument maker in France. And this was a project that I began with them in 2017. It was the development and design of a new professional model clarinet with the characteristics that I gave kind of voice to, things that I might, myself along with some other professionals around the world, that we'd like to see in the new clarinet. And so actually this recording was done on the prototype. It actually was recorded before the instrument, the Selmer Muse clarinet, it's called the Muse, before it was officially released. And so I was playing on a prototype model at the time. It was so good I felt confident enough to be playing with it then.
Well, the quality of tone is just absolutely magnificent in all ranges, in all dynamics. The consistency, of course, that's mostly you and your chops and your intellect, but the instrument just seemed, in retrospect and thinking, and I'm glad we're going to talk about it a bit, the Muse, the new state-of-the-art, and I'm going to ask you a question that I hope isn't too stupid about it.
Sure.
That's something. That's what I heard. And is it something about I read somewhere something about crossing. I've forgotten now. It's been so long, but crossing over the whatever that moment
Oh,
is.
the break, is
The
that what
break.
you're saying?
Is that
Right.
it? Where you mentioned somewhere that the break design is much cleaner or
You
something?
know, I do mention that. That's one of the really great things about this instrument is that, for some of the listeners out there who are at least a little bit familiar with the clarinet, there's a break where
An
you're really
awkward
going
bit of
from not using a lot of fingers to all of a sudden using many fingers, and it changes registers. And so it can be tricky for developing clarinetists and even for professionals alike. But this instrument, what's so amazing about it is it really makes that transition much easier. And so it becomes a thing that doesn't become an impediment for any player.
that is nice, and also it's very very clear in what I heard. That break moment, I remember
Mm.
remember it from my youth. We've had to talk about Stoltzman. I did study with Stoltzman at Cal Arts briefly, and then I said, no, I'm not going to make reeds. I'm sorry,
Ah,
Richard.
right.
And when it became the conductor major there, but I do remember that break, and you can hear it if you get you understand, but you can kind of hear it in almost every regular regular modern clarinet. There's something that changes. The what go?
Yeah, no, it's so nice to hear you talk about this because it's been something that I've been focusing on for many years. Is actually just I've been really obsessed with tone and trying to produce a tone that pleases first my ears, which is uniformity of tone across all the registers. And the clarinet
That's
traditionally
what I
has
heard.
3 registers, and we don't want them to stick out in any negative way. And so trying to make them all uniform has been something that I think every clarinetist strives for. It's been, but this pursuit of having a sound that is unique to me and also pleasing to the ear for clarinetists and non-clarinetists is something that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about over many, many years. And so it's very nice to hear you say that.
And developing and improving apparently, because I could hear it right away. I could not hear it.
Mm,
you know
yeah, very nice.
and that's the thing. It really sort of threw me for a bit, again, this consistent. What is it about the we don't want to spend an hour on this, but is it
Oh,
about the way the bore is what or
there's
extra
so many
keys or what?
factors. Yeah, part of it is that, right? Every clarinet, different models of clarinets will have different design characteristics of the bore, which is the inside of the clarinet, and but a lot of this has to do also not only with the clarinet, but a player's choice of mouthpiece and the player's choice of
Sure.
reed and ligature. The ligature is what holds the reed onto the mouthpiece. So all of those factors, and on top of that, how the player plays,
Of course.
what they're listening for, their embouchure, how they produce sound via air. I mean, there's so many factors that go into producing sound, and so that's why playing the clarinet is actually quite challenging. And a lot of wind instruments are challenging for these reasons. It's but not only the instrument, but it's, the extraneous. Maybe they're not extraneous, but equipment like mouthpieces and reeds, and then it's like the physical makeup of the individual, and how they use air. So a lot goes.
Air Revelations,
Absolutely.
indeed. Tell me about it. It's a perfect segue.
Air Revelation is
Oh,
a
Air
program that
Revelation,
I
excuse me.
developed several years ago and now use with my students, and it's used around the world by wind players, so wind musicians, woodwinds, brass players, singers. It's used in classrooms for band. So the website's www.airrevelation.com, and you can see all the places in the world that is using Air Revelation. What it is, it's a breath support training program for musicians. The most important thing that we need when we're playing a wind instrument is air, is wind, right? And it's not only about the exhaling that happens into the clarinet, but it's also about the breathing that happens into your body. So without really great usage and relaxation of the body, we're not going to be able to play our best playing a musical instrument. And I recognize that in my students. And so there's a device, actually I have it right here, called the incentive spirometer. It's a medical
Holy
device.
Lord.
Some of you, out there might have used this in a hospital, but it's a breathing device.
Yeah.
And this was a device that I developed. Well, I did not develop. This is a device that I discovered, is what I wanted to say, through the tubist of the longtime tubist of the Chicago Symphony, Arnold Jacobs, who would use a lot of breathing devices in his own teaching and pedagogy. And so I, got myself one of these, and all of a sudden it just started flowing out of me. All of these ideas of how to make every aspect of what we do in our wind playing and how to make a corresponding exercise on this device. And so I have this training program is 4 weeks, and there are exercises that you do daily away from your clarinet that help you develop the awareness of how to play with good breathing and breath support and tone, and then you apply that to your playing. And so, one of the hardest aspects of learning an instrument is putting it all together, and there's so many things that go into playing an instrument, so many things to think of, so many things to be aware of. And so what this Air Revelation program is to help you develop air separate from the instrument so that you can just apply it to the instrument without thinking too hard. It just becomes second nature.
And as you very well know, musicians, especially wind musicians, need this.
Absolutely.
They don't have a clue.
Absolutely.
Really don't have a clue. You need. It's not a shameful thing. It's just that this is a very sophisticated application of a crucial technique. This idea of breathing properly. Again, I hope I'm not getting out of line here about your program. But I'll give you a quick anecdote again that was, to this day, the biggest revelation about exactly what you're training people on. It was a high school, honor high school concert band from Honolulu, playing at a huge, the big music educators convention or something in Las Vegas. I think I was still in high school, and there was a breathing warm up that this huge band went through before all of us, before they began to play. And it was, you could hear the sweeping sounds that I also hear in the CD, the effects that we'll talk about later. But they all did this breathing exercise. And then they played two of the most, I conducted a wind ensemble for many years, and two of the pieces I immediately bought and took back to Santa Barbara. And that sound was one continuous phrase. Yeah. There was no ripple, no breathing ripple. It was just a huge sound, consistent sound for an 8 or 9 or 10 minute piece. It just blew us all away at the convention. Right. That is what we're talking about, right? This idea. Once you understand how air flows, especially if you're a wind player, and how to do these things properly with training, as per your Air Revelation program, it's a world of difference. So I'm glad we got there. Yeah, well, because you wanted to say something else?
No, that's exactly right, and it's also the control of the air, right? It's like, if what we are as musicians is we're athletes, we're artists, and we're having to put those two things together, right? It's the real control of the body merged with the artistry, and so without one, things fall short. Yeah. And so I think there's always a lot of focus from the player standpoint of what's happening in the music, but how do we make that happen? It's really having complete control over what you want to do with your body to make the music happen. And for wind players, it has to be control of the air. It has to be.
And once you can control that, you can get rid of the bar line.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's really nice to hear you say that.
You can lose the bar line, and that is, in my view, crucial.
And also the worry and the fear and the inhibitions, sure. Because when you have that control, then you don't have that worry or that fear, and so then you have freedom, and that's where the magic happens in the music making.
Yeah. Ooh, this has been good. Good conversation so far. Let's see. Anything else here? Clarinet Academy. Did we lift? Clarinet Academy.
Oh, sure, yes. Yeah, the Lift Clarinet Academy is a program that I host at Colorado State University since 2014. It's a summer clarinet program. It's a 1-week program. We attract students from all over the United States and the world, and they come here. And we have several guests besides myself who come and teach and perform, and it's a really immersive week. I mean, it really is a week of clarinet, but a week of music and art and artistry, and so that's a program that's been going on strong, quite popular. I'm very proud of it. And so you're referencing that, yeah.
Well, you look like you're 12 years old. How can you possibly do all, all this stuff?
Well, I'll
I
take that
hope
as
I
a
haven't just.
compliment. I hope that people continue to tell me that.
I hope
20
I
years.
haven't insulted you, by the way. But
No,
you know, as one gets older, one gets more jealous. Let's put it
sure,
that way.
sure.
I want to start going through these pieces.
Okay.
Okay, hang on. Let's start with the very first piece on the CD, Alexei Goroholinsky's Into the Green. And the way I want to do this is I always, listen and then take notes, like stream of consciousness notes.
Right.
And I just realized I forgot to sort of dark out stuff, make bold some of these things. But why don't I throw a few things out? And this is I've watched the video. This really gets the whole CD off the ground. Also, who you are and what you do, because it is a theater piece, or can be, can it not? Let's see. It's so completely different. What are my notes here? These interesting electronic effects. In other words, every single composer, colleague, clarinetist. Alexei is a clarinetist, yeah, so he knows the instrument. You don't fool around. These people know of course, because they're colleagues. I don't mean to sound so stupid, but these are really, again, to me, totally unknown, and yet each of these pieces is a perfect assemblage. In terms of these guys know these people know what they're doing.
Sure.
Why don't you, let's see, what if I love the electronic sound of the drum kit. In that first, it's there's all kinds of bubbly colors, and then I'll let you jump in and say something. It's an understandable narrative. Lots of virtuosic, repetitive clarinet figures, which just knock the pants off an audience listening to the piece, I'm sure. It's hip, it's cool, it's pop music-ish, quite deliberately and quite wonderfully. It's clearly intelligent in the use of colors, the use of this interchange between the clarinet and the electronic sounds. It's a beaut. Your turn.
Yeah, this is a piece, the title track of the album, that I knew would hit people in a certain way. It's very different than anything you might expect a classically trained musician to play. It's electronic dance music. This is the type of music that you might have people dressing up and going to raves at night. And actually, Alexei, who I've known for a long time, in addition to being a classically trained clarinetist from Juilliard, he also is a really quite talented DJ, and so he composed the works. He composed the background track, and of course the clarinet part as well. But it's really a really authentic electronic dance music piece of music, except for the fact that you have an acoustic instrument, clarinet. And so really this is, and that's where I'm getting at also with the cover. You see from the cover that one side of my face.
Oh
yeah. There's electronic.
There you go. That's damn good.
Wires and everything. And then on the other side, you have nature, flowers and things growing out of my hair. Really, this album is a mix of it's a merging of acoustic and natural materials, the clarinet made out of wood, with music that is, especially nowadays, starting to get a lot more away from an acoustic sound, merging with electronic sound. So that first piece has that so clearly, and it is dance music. And I was really, he's written a number of these types of pieces, and I was really taken with this work, partly because it's that merging of the acoustic clarinet with the electronic music, and in some ways it's a nod to the future. Really, we live in a world where there's so many demands on us. Things are moving at a fast pace, and of course our use of electronics. I mean, you and I are speaking today in a way that we couldn't 30 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago. And so this merging of a natural life, we can look outside of our windows and recognize nature, with what we see in our houses, which is like electronics and televisions and cell phones and all of these items. It's really that's really the theme of this album, is the merging of the two. And that piece right away, with a bang, with energy, merges those two.
And I'm going to put up Alexi's video
Hmm.
because you've just described exactly what that's about. And somebody wrote a little note that said, "Do these guys have any idea you're a world-class clarinetist?" Because it's clearly a setting where he's, playing his clarinet and fooling with the
Sure.
dials. You've seen it, I'm sure.
Yes,
And
exactly.
meanwhile, I don't know if that was what campus it was on, but it looked like a room in a campus of some kind of campus. People, kids, college kids are there dancing and improvising and stuff. It's fabulous.
Mm.
And I can only say it was not CalArts that changed me.
Okay.
What I mean is, you know, most of my young years in my 30s, 20s, and 30s and 40s, I was a square box. I mean, it was white tie tailcoat. It was the orchestral repertoire. It is, I have no use for all that stuff. What do you mean you're going to put this sleazy lower level, all that? Now I'm finally have gotten over all of that. This mix is the savior of our world of music, period.
Yeah, it's so great
So,
to hear you say that. I think people are much more open now
I think
to,
so too.
just in general, just
Yeah.
more open to differences and things that connections that are not so black and white, and the merging of styles, and so this album has a lot of that.
So that piece, just to finish off my notes on that piece, let me just make sure everybody's clear. We're talking about Into the Green, the first cut on the CD. My last little remarks are virtuoso playing and mixing, as in the quality of the sound engineering is absolutely stunning. And for me, what that means is I hear a clarinet.
Oh, that's great.
I don't hear space. I don't hear, stop. You know what I mean? There, you can hear an atmosphere, I think.
And some of that credit for sure goes to, I recorded here in our concert hall at Colorado State University,
I
beautiful
wondered.
facility,
Yeah.
and the recording engineer,
He's,
was fantastic recording engineer.
I'll find her and put him or her in and put the name in if I can find it. I'm looking at the sheet. But yeah, stunning. I mean, really stunning technical level of this recording, let alone the addition of electronic stuff. I mean, it's really beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
So those were my thoughts. Really nice clarinet sound. And I ask, is this your new clarinet design? Yeah, the prototype apparently. Really nice, accessible, subtle, and virtuosically put together piece. So that's a huge high compliment for this genre, if you will, this kind of popish, folkish, funnish genre of that piece to try.
Oh, sure.
So
Yeah.
without any condescension whatsoever. That's the really important thing. Okay. Next, very complicated name, Donald Stephen. Sapphire Song, composed in 1986. I found that. I'm not quite sure when Donald was around, but probably within recent years was born.
Sure.
Canadian-American composer. Began his career performing and arranging folk and rock music. So once again, we're moving into that fusion, something or other. I hate to use some of those kinds of words because we're way beyond the insults of that whole idea.
Sure.
But rock music in the 1960s, most notably with the Raftsmen. I guess that was a popular band at the rock band at the time. The guy has a Bachelor of Music from McGill, Master of Music. By the way, you have a doctorate degree, so
Right.
Professor, thank you for coming on. Let's see, this Donald Stephen masters in Princeton. So you wanted to, by the way, how many of these guys have you met? When did you meet them? Let's talk with Donald, but go back to.
Yeah, that's great. I
Awesome.
just, so he's a fellow Canadian, and I first, I first discovered this work. Actually, it was my undergraduate professor that this piece was written for. And so this piece was written for him, and my undergraduate professor encouraged me to learn this piece when I was quite young, and it just really spoke to me. This is a wonderful piece and very reflective. It's based on the shakuhachi flute playing in Japan, found in Japan. And so it was around that time, so really 20 years ago, where I first discovered this work, and I've played it many, many, many times since. It's a work that keeps calling me. And the truth is, when I perform this live, anytime I perform this live, and it's now been all over the world. I've performed this in Brazil and in Poland and Canada, the United States. It always had the same effect on people. It really, I can feel the room getting quite silent, and that people are leaning in and listening to it, because again, it evokes something almost spiritual, this work. And it has a lot of space, and also the notation isn't conventional. It isn't, there aren't any bar lines, there's no meter, and so there's a lot of freedom for the clarinetist, and I really, really enjoy that. This piece has bird sounds in the background, and those were added, that I added for this recording, got permission from Donald Stephen. He thought this was a wonderful idea, and so what I wanted to do with the first piece, which was so really electronic dance music and fast-paced and really sounds foreign, then all of a sudden you have this immediate contrast with birds, space.
It's a huge, that's almost 15-minute meditation. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
And by the way, that's a hard 15 minutes to sustain. And when I heard the bird song, I was in.
Mm-hmm.
I
It
understood
really is.
exactly.
It's really nice to hear you say that, meditation, because I've had a few people now comment after listening to the album that it is so meditative for them. And
your choice of bird song for this recording is because it becomes a narrative between the solo clarinet and the birds. It's like they almost comment back. I realize it's a bird song track, but the what do you call it? The intention is certainly there, I think.
That's right.
With this composer. Right. And I also saw the video of you performing it, I presume, at the college.
That's right.
Being a theater guy, there you were on your special platform, I think on your knees in a kind of, maybe, now that I realize it's kind of Japanese inspired, or I hope I've got the right country. But the idea of involving a little bit of theater, the bird song, or in the case of the live performance, where became a ritual, it became a meditative ritual, physically, that video that I saw. Mm-hmm. And what else about it? That wonderful low to mid register range on that instrument. It's gorgeous. It's just cool. And also, this is what I was trying to remember. This might as easily have been a Native American tune, or, as you say, a Japanese tune. What I'm talking about is the universality, and we mentioned that a little bit before, Tammy, of tunes. I guess tunes would be an okay word. That's what's so wonderful, especially a little later in some of these other pieces. Could be, as I mentioned earlier to you, it could be Yiddish, it could be Middle Eastern, it could be Moorish. It's just this universality of certain kind of tunes
Yeah, that's so nice to hear you say, and that I think is what I was getting at with this idea that they had this spiritual aspect. It could have, this idea of whether it's spirituality, that it's part of every culture, and so also, as you were referring to, that sometimes you hear whether it's tunes or melodies, and you can't quite put where, what part of the world is that from? You can't quite put your finger on it, and that's what really interests me, because I think about what was really interesting to me is to evoke through pieces of music, or especially this universality, about humans, like what is a truth in music, and usually what's truth in music is something that touches you deeply. And it touches you the same it might touch someone who lives in a different country in a different part of the world, and that's real truth. That's when you're really touching humans. And so, with certain pieces, and I'm naturally attracted to pieces like that, which is, all the pieces on this album. I wouldn't have put it on. I wouldn't have spent months and months preparing if I didn't feel like there was a really important connection that I had with them. So yeah, it's really nice that you're touching on that.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, the struggle. Which, this goes mostly to college music faculty who are all putting out their CDs, and they have, as you have to raise the money, you got to choose them. I mean, it goes on. It takes, these are year-long. Well, in this case, maybe was a figment, an idea in your head around 2000?
Oh, yeah. The truth is, I always, if one were to read my bio, they would see, Wesley does a lot of things, and I have a lot of things on the go, and but I enjoy them. They give me energy, and I have a lot of ideas, and so I always have projects and ideas years advance. I probably have enough ideas and projects to go the next 10 years. And so actually this album is something that I thought about many, many years ago.
Okay.
And
Not
so
surprised.
the time was right when I decided, okay, now I can move to this type of project.
Yeah. And then you did have to raise some money and get some grants and things like that to get it, of course, as everybody does. But this whole idea, and while we're there on that subject, how am I doing time-wise? Not that it matters, I don't care. This whole idea of choosing, it's your project, it's the CD. This is your 9th, I think you said. So it's old hat in many ways, the process of getting a CD put out. But those decisions about choosing what's going to fit on whatever 50 minutes, 58 minutes of music, who got left behind? You don't need to name names, but I'm saying how big a heap over here was left behind while you narrowed it down to these composers in particular, or not, maybe.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I did have some other pieces in mind, and actually I did record another work, and again, I won't mention it, but I recorded another work. It was intended to be on this album. But then once you record all the pieces and you figure out what order you'd like to put it in and thematically what makes sense, this particular work that I found didn't, it just fell outside a little bit of what I thought was the cohesive theme. And so I decided not to put that on the album. That's recorded. It might go on another album. But you're touching on an interesting topic, which is, for anyone who records an album, a solo album, certainly a good amount of thought goes into what you'd like to record. And in some of my previous albums, of course, you record pieces that you like, record pieces you think you can play well. The difference in this case is I really challenged myself. Some of these pieces that I performed on the album, it was the first time I'd ever played them. And so that can be a little bit scary, because you really put things on the line by saying, but it also really sharpens the blade, because there's nothing like whether it's a deadline or in this case a recording that's going to go out there and will be out there forever, to really make you focus and spend the time and the effort to make it something that you will be proud of.
Youth, you love deadlines. I hate them. But in my old age, but yeah, exactly, and that's right. And these days I'm a critic, as you know, and also program notes. Arc is everything to me. The arc of a program. Same in CDs. The arc of it. If there's, these things either have thought or not.
Right.
That's the difference maybe between professionals and amateurs who just, I'm thinking of programming. I'm just doing a whole bunch of program notes. And boy, are there arcs. These conductors that I'm working with anyway, they know exactly what they're up to and how they're shaping things. Very, very important. Nikola Rozanovic, born 1955, alt.music.ballistics with an X for clarinet and tape from 1995. What an amazing, wonderful piece this is. Let me see if I got some things here. Rozanovic is American composer, professor emeritus at the University of Akron School of Music. And I got a couple little quotes from some other reviews about this piece. Opened with industrial note. It's fascinating. I love that kind of mix when you get the whole world into electronic sounds. I mean, I just love it. But the piece opens with industrial noises, sounds of overseas telephone operator. It's a hoot of a piece, and it speaks, as you mentioned, or somebody mentions in the program notes, it speaks to just this dystopian, dysfunctional, crazy world of electronic intrusions in all of our lives that we're all used to, and it's fine. I'm happy with it all, except that it's there, it's ever present. Why don't you, I think it's time for, and there are three little movements. Matter of fax, F-A-X, a play on words and referencing fax machines. You're always hearing that sound when you when you call in on a fax machine. It's very cute. This, and then the second movement is a soliloquy. That's very, very important, and I want you to talk about it. And then the last piece, Balkan Dance, is just crazy fun. Go, your turn.
Yeah, exactly. And that third movement of Balkan Dance turns into, without much break, into a fourth movement.
Yeah,
And on the
right.
album, it's a separate track. But this is one of the older, this is the oldest piece of clarinet electronics on the album. And so it might make some listeners a little nostalgic because it was written in '95. And if you think about the technology that was in use at that time, so you'll hear a fax machine, you know, and you'll hear an operator, and it sounds very much like an old operator saying, you know, please disconnect. Or you'll also hear these early, if you remember the internet sounds when we all had dial-up, you know, when our internet access went through the phone lines, and you get this, you know, interesting sound. So you really get the sounds from the '90s of technology, and the idea that Razanovic had is this idea of mixing. Again, this worked perfectly for the theme of this album, but mixing the technology of the day with this idea, and he actually writes it in the program notes for the piece. He imagines this Balkan, or this like sheep farmer that's in the Balkans that maybe has this satellite phone, and he's checking like the latest stock prices. So you have this real, you know, real juxtaposition between you know, the old world and the new world. And so the piece does, with that soliloquy movement, it's a slow solo movement for clarinet, solo unaccompanied clarinet. Then of course the electronics come in, and then you really get cooking with the piece. And of course, you know, it's this title that you referenced, Balkan Dance, is the third movement, and you really get a lot of those Balkan dance rhythms, and also the harmonies, and also the melodies in that to make it yeah, really a nice bit of folk music there.
And it's a dervish, if you will. And again, we're talking Balkans, which is a huge mix of, you know, Mongols and whatever, Gauls, and all. What I'm talking about is, again, these tunes, Middle Eastern clarinet, I say to myself as I'm listening to it today, and it's Balkan. It's not, and it is. We've had that conversation already. How close some of these really bass folk tunes are in terms of the universality, the broad expanse over which these kind of basic tunes and modes traveled. Okay, so it's one, and then thanks for reminding me, but that third movement segues into the fourth movement, convolution at uacron.edu. Well, this guy has a sense of humor that won't quit, and it's even faster. That last bit, really, lots more crazy, lots of stuff on clarinet. We haven't even mentioned the virtuosity of the writing.
You know, it was. This was an album that challenged me, and I think, you know, I was looking for that. I really wanted an album that would challenge me, that would allow me to grow as a musician, as an artist. And so a lot of these works really quite fast moving fingers, and of course you have to play it well, but also with good tone and all those things, good intonation as you reference. And so, but it's fun. It's also, you know, this piece cooks, and so yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And that what do you call it? Clarinet. What do you you know, the what's the initial? I want to say, I've lost the word, but you know, the example, the new instrument, the prototype.
Oh, yes.
That
That's
was
right.
the word.
Okay.
And the prototype did damn well, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
wow.
know, that's one of the, again, you know, everyone should be so lucky to play on an instrument that gives them freedom. And you know, I benefited from being one of the contributors to the design of this project, but this instrument allows me to just go to another level, and so, you know, might be something that if you were to compare my previous album to this album, and of course there are a few years and much more experience and time put into the instrument, but certainly with the use of this instrument, there's just a lot more freedom and the confidence that comes with playing an instrument like that.
Well, I certainly could hear it. There is something about that instrument that as we've discussed here, about the new Selmer model that you've been involved in designing, that is really, you know, the Cadillac of the instruments. I mean, it just seems like the instrument works willingly for you instead of
Absolutely.
giving you trouble at the break, as we mentioned
Absolutely.
earlier, stuff like that. And then this last movie, Convolution, at uakron.edu, settles down as per what we were mentioning about this dystopian electronic world. And I'm just a couple of quotes I say, quote, enter password and pound sign, for example, comes, in the distance, this vacuous voice. That entry is incorrect, etc., etc. Try again. All the stuff we are so used to now that we can finally maybe laugh at a little bit.
Yes, and the music interacts with that, right? The interacts with the voices, and so that's a really neat part.
It's very clever, very clever. But I've lost something. I kind of goofed and didn't bold out. This might be the piece. Where I want to ask you, let's talk a little bit about some of the special effects that the instrument is capable of. You can describe them better than I can at the moment. I love blowing air through the instrument. That sound, it's like the winds of trees in the night. I mean, the magic of it. I also love, and I'm going to ask you the question, and I hope I don't get in trouble, microtones. That are created right with where the fingers are or not, and how you that whole thing. I heard very distinct microtones, which is, as everybody in our profession is this pitch just in the otherwise perfect playing. So I knew it had to be in the music.
Right.
These little microtones that pop up every once in a while that just twist. Things, the psychology of it all, just a touch, just a little.
That's right. It's an expansion of the musical language nowadays. At one time, these were considered quite contemporary and at the leading edge of music and playing of certain instruments, and now they're becoming more commonplace, and our ears are also getting used to hearing them in the context of a otherwise maybe more standard work. But yes, a lot of the pieces on this album have these air sounds where you're blowing air through the tube of the clarinet, where you're playing microtones or multiphonics, which are multiphonics, of course, playing two sounds at once, and a lot of different effects that add to the atmosphere and add to the storytelling. And when these types of techniques are used well, and when they're composed in a way that with thought and a holistic view of how it fits in the piece, then they're additive parts. They don't distract. They actually add a lot to it.
And as you described these, I realize it's all old hat now. See how far we've come in the last 10 or 15 years? Absolutely. It's just these were really unique once upon 15 years ago or so, and they're still wonderful. But now I think even the public looks at and recognizes these funny little things going on as being just really entertaining and part of what's intended.
I think that speaks to that openness we were talking about earlier. People just being more open to things they hear, things they see, just in general. So yeah, it's really nice.
And let's go on to Derek Bermel's Thracian Sketches from 2003. I think maybe that might be one of the more recent pieces. Again, by a clarinetist composer. Well done. You didn't fool around. You chose guys who knew how to write for the instrument. Uses a complex and irregular rhythms, drawing a connection between. Again, you've got this thing about Bulgarian Balkan connection, folk music, and a cosmopolitan modern sensibility. I found that I think in one of his things. He's an American composer, clarinetist, conductor, born in 1967. It does make me feel old. And Grammy nominated, all that good stuff. Let's talk about that piece, please. Thracian Sketches, but hang on just one second. Give me a second. Sure. Is this the one that deals with Thracian? Thracian is that instrument, isn't it?
No, that's the last piece.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Oh, good. The best is coming last. Okay, good. Thank you for not letting me dig myself a tomb there. Okay, tell me about Thracian Sketches from 2000.
This piece is written by Derek Bermel, and there's actually a recording of him playing it on YouTube. One can find that, and so he did. He went and really studied the different folk tunes, the folk songs from that tradition, and so he's incorporated a lot of these melodic styles that are found in that music in this piece, and also the different rhythms. Many rhythms that are not always so square. So a lot of 7/8 rhythms and 5/8 rhythms that you might find from that music from that part of the world. This piece is actually a continuous, from start to finish. There are not very many places of pause, or in other words, breath. And so, as we were talking about contemporary techniques or techniques that a player nowadays needs to or would benefit them to be able to use, I used a lot of circular breathing in this piece. So, and there are probably spots where you can hear the music. Well, you can. The music's going, but you'll hear
that, yeah,
a breath that's happening through my nose. And so that made the playing of the piece possible.
Yeah. Repetitive mesmeric figures. That's one of my notes. Repetitive,
wonderful.
And repetitive's the key word. Mesmeric figures. It's
It was written for John Adams. It was written in a minimalist style and by Derek Vermel for John Adams. I would say maybe an homage of him. And the piece starts really low in the low range of the clarinet. It starts low range and it's rather slow. And the piece continually gets faster. I mean, essentially from the beginning to the very end, the tempo just continues gradually, very gradually to increase, and the range of the clarinet goes from low to at the very end. I'm playing in the highest altissimo range of the clarinet, and it's really, really quite quick and fast. And so it was a challenging work, but also a very rewarding work, and also I kept thinking as I was preparing this piece that I cannot make this sound difficult. It needs to sound easy. It needs to sound like it's coming across as easy for me so that the listener can just enjoy the music without thinking about how this is being technically done on the clarinet. So
that's the duty. That's your duty, all right. That's your
exactly.
duty. And speaking of dervishes, this Balkan dervish in the works as it just spins and spins and spins. It's contagious. Again, repetitive mesmeric figures. I love that. And you just described why. This John Adams kind of homage to John Adams and minimalism, if you will. It's contagious, the pace, the spinning imagery of the music, joyous, fast, high register. Now, I hear you in all registers in this piece, especially from the beginning, that wonderful low register. It's basically ecstatic. You reach a point of complete ecstasy.
Yeah.
Well, that's the intention. Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
It's played perfectly. That instrument, your technique, whatever it is. You don't use French embouchure, do you?
Standard single lip embouchure.
Okay. I worried for a bit. I worried a little bit.
That's exactly right.
Something about Canadian, made me.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Anyway, if you were in Montreal or something. Anyway, it's wonderful, wonderful piece. No wonder Grammy nominated clarinetist Derek Vermel. Widely hailed for his creativity, theatricality, and virtuosity. Is this done when you do public performances? Is there anything special about movement or placement or wearing masks or anything like that?
Not necessarily, but as you were alluding to earlier, the concert that I did where it was a more theatrical concert. I really do like the idea of presenting music in a different way.
Yeah.
Presenting anything that I do in a different way. I think that's part of my artistic bent, is to think about presenting things that people haven't done before, haven't thought about, something that will make them think, something that will connect to people. And so this piece...
And it's not a gimmick. What you've just described, it's not gimmickry. We're not talking gimmick.
Well, the idea is to add to the music and not detract. That's right. That's the idea, can we add to the live listener's experience? And that's the focus of a lot of what I do.
Well done. I can't wait to get to some of those videos up. I'll let you know. So some of you might say, no, I don't want to be sitting on my knees in front of whatever that recital was. Anyway, now let's talk, because this piece has everything. This is the last piece, I think, on that thing. Is it? Hang on. Oh no, it isn't quite. I'm looking. Sorry about that. I'm looking at Gergely Vajda's.
That's right.
Light Shadows. I can't remember. I've seen it as light shadow, trembling, and light shadows. Trembling. It doesn't matter much, but I'm just curious. Do you remember?
It's light shadows trembling.
Okay, thanks.
And that's the
Because it has to
English.
make sense, you know, it has
That's
to make
right.
sense.
And that's the English translation of the piece. And I'm really, this is a very evocative piece, like aurally.
Yeah, yeah.
And I love that translation of light shadows trembling because, as you recall, the opening has this almost as if there was a candle flickering.
Excellent, excellent. Well done. Thank you for that description. And that's what I always look for anyway. In other words, words are very, very important. Descriptive
Right.
words are very, very important. So I'm glad of that. And that light shadows trembling. I mean, just your imagination just goes right through the
Yeah.
roof just reading those two words. And the
Right.
comma is crucial even.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that got my attention right away. It's wonderful. Begins immediately with mesmerizing sound effects. It kind of has some pointillist moments. These are just my notes off the top of my head. Those echoing sounds. I hear kind of, stop me if I'm way off track here.
Right.
But, and of course, Gershwin howl here and there for fun
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. Wonderful. All that, you know what I mean, all that
Right.
Rhapsody in Blue stuff throughout the CD, by the way. These are techniques that are, practically standard these days, if you get my drift. It's become so acceptable to do these special things with the clarinet. It stays nicely bound to certain formulas, is one of
Mm-hmm.
my notes. I like that. Go ahead, throw something
You know,
at me about
it's
this.
compositionally, it's well done. I think that's what you were talking about. And this is a piece that I imagine as I'm playing. It's a piece of solitude. It's a piece that's performed. Imagine performing a piece with your heart out, just completely performing with all that you have, but for no one. In a silent room, maybe the room is dark, and the way the piece is written, there are a lot of these sounds, and then of course you'll listen to the echo, and then decide how you might respond and go in a different direction. Everything's written into the piece, so none of it's improvised, but the way it's composed has these elements, and again, very descriptive. This is one of my favorite pieces. Again, as I performed this piece in the past for on recitals and on programs, it's always one that people really connect with, I think, because there's pieces of music that bring joy, and we've used that word here, and there's pieces of music that are reflective, and I think each of those speaks to a human condition. All these items, happiness, joy, and fear, and solitude, and so I often think about those types, the human condition, and those, whether it's emotions or states of being, and I try to infuse that or find opportunities in music to show that. And this piece lends itself well to that.
Yep, and you've made this philosophy clear in other remarks I've read of yours. Frederick Hogberg, a Swede, I'm Swedish, Invisible, oh, Swedish German, okay, Invisible Duet. This one is, and by the way, a kind of meditation.
Right.
Opens the piece.
Right.
Low humming tone. I mean, there are all kind of these wonderful things. It goes on for a bit like Om. That's what went through
Right.
my mind. Lots of detail in electronic sounds. Then enters the clarinet with trills and low registers and so on and so forth. It's just full of stuff. The electronics are accessories to the fun. I say here. Even male voices here and there with boom, boom. I mean, it's very clever, very, very clever. Tell us a little bit about it.
This piece is written by a Swede and also written for one of the most well-known clarinetists of our time, Martin Frost, who's also Swedish. And so in this piece, yes, it has the sounds of monks meditating. And this idea of the invisible duet is actually, there is a clarinetist playing. Of course, it's recorded, but it's a clarinetist playing. And so when you listen to this piece, you'll hear myself. I think it'll be obvious that maybe it's a little bit louder.
You're present. And then there's this distant.
Exactly. There's
double,
this
this
distant clarinet that sometimes you'll hear that distant clarinet play something, and I'll immediately play the same thing back.
Very
And
clever.
so, and at one point, I think the piece even has like the invisible duet begins, and you'll hear the other clarinet playing this part, and I play a part. It's a little bit off, but it's a little bit, they're interacting, and so there's a lot. There's a lot going on.
Just you and your doppelganger. That's what can I say?
Exactly it. There you go.
But it's just a carnival of fun sounds, tunes, rhythms. It's a hoot, really. It's fun. I love that men's choir in there, as you mentioned. is that electronic, or did they must have taped them in?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Yeah,
they're
must have.
live. It really does sound. It's probably manipulated electronically,
Yeah.
but real human voices.
And I say here, it's impossible not to dance and fool around on this one. It's joyously chaotic. Uh, and then there's a quote: "Well done, my friend. Please disassemble your instrument. Meditation begins." Oh, it's the voice that speaks
That's
to us.
exactly right.
Well done, my friend.
Yeah.
Please disassemble your instrument. That disassociative voice talking at me at the end of the piece. Meditation begins. Right. And then the male chorus. Oh, yeah. It's a
Yeah.
beauty. Well
Glad
done.
you like that. It
Well
is
done.
one of my, of course, I like all the pieces on this album, but that's one of my favorites, both to perform, but also, frankly, to listen to as well.
Yeah, and like I think I said to you before we began, I mentioned almost embarrassedly that this is a really entertaining CD, and that's really a compliment considering what we're looking at. Esoteric
Sure.
repertoire, clarinet and electronics. It's really, really entertaining. Now we're gonna have to wind this thing down, or we'll be here till midnight. But Serban Nikifor Karniks, this is worth us one, and apparently it's dedicated to Andrew Simon, American clarinetist. This is just a beauty. I had to look up Karniks. Pardon my ear thing here. It was an ancient wind instrument from the Iron Age. Celts, used. Sorry, my cat's dying on me. Used between 200 BC and around AD 200. The reason I want to bother with this kind of explanation, and you're going to tell us about it, I heard that instrument, I think at least twice. And what I mean by the instrument is that the effect, right? You know what I'm talking about, those.
Absolutely.
A couple of times. And I just could see the Roman soldiers with this thing with the horn out the top that we've heard in all the movies, Ten Commandments maybe, stuff like that. Tell me about this wonderful, wonderful piece.
Yeah, this is a really great piece, and I knew I wanted to put it last on the album because I think it would leave a lasting impression on the listener, were they to listen from the beginning to the end. And this piece has almost everything, a lot of contemporary techniques for the clarinet. Of course, it begins with this really big wail. It's almost like the sound of war. And this instrument you were referring to really was this instrument of war. It was really one that was used to scare. To scare. And it's interesting that we were talking about that, because that sound that I have to emulate down there is the sound that you create on the clarinet that has all of these layers of different partials. And so you're hearing so many different sounds once. It's really quite unique. And actually, it is quite scary. I have this funny story, a little anecdote. When sometimes I'll just make that sound almost out of habit. I'm actually not quite sure why, but I remember one time with my young son, I was practicing, and he was in his, I think, the playpen, just kind of in the same room, and he was playing and having fun. He's a joyous little boy. I think he wasn't even yet a year old, and I was practicing. Everything's going great, and I think I just made that sound, and he just wailed. He was so scared by that sound. Wow. And so it is actually quite appropriate that sound would be one that might be scary to some people. And it is included in this piece several times, and it's got this real kind of like a repetitive, almost forceful rhythm when I'm playing that.
Yeah, exactly. And as we've said, it's exactly the intention of the instrument at the time. It was a military horn, but it was also meant to terrify the opposition, so to say. It's wonderful, and as you've mentioned, these several moments, I have heard at least two. I'll have to re-listen to have fun with it. It's fun. I mean, the album, pardon me again, is just really, really a go back to CD, and that's an enormous compliment for a really highly esoteric contemporary CD.
That's such a great compliment. I thank you so much for saying that, because as I'm hearing you talk about that and reflecting on the piece, on all the pieces on the album myself, that there's a lot of acrobatics in this album, right? The clarinet is high, low, jumping, leaping. There's a lot of colors and a lot of flickering, and a lot of and I think that's a lot of ear candy, actually. Like, as you're listening, there's just a lot of interesting things to grab onto, and all of these pieces. All these pieces this last work that we were talking about, even though it has contemporary techniques, they're used in such an interesting way that they, and they're not just sounds. These aren't soundscapes. They are, there's melody and rhythm intertwined in all of this, and so it's really quite easy to follow the story, the arc of the piece from the beginning to the end. That's something that I often look for in pieces that I'm going to perform.
Yeah, and they're all very, very well written, as you have just said. And the whole CD is entertaining. I think that's the best compliment I can possibly give you, considering this repertoire. I'd never heard of any of these people.
I think you're right. It's a little bit of a risk, right? Like, to put out a piece, an album that has so many contemporary pieces that that people maybe aren't used to listening to this type of music. But my goal is to make an artistic product.
Yeah, no, exactly right. This is a clear example of that, because nobody knows any of this.
Right.
Okay, except of course you folks in the clarinet industry, if you will. That was a horrible choice of word, industry. Ugh.
Clarinet world.
Thank you,
Community.
Clarinet world. I feel so ashamed. But that is my highest compliment. It's so entertaining, and that also may speak, of course. You and I have been listening to music for a long time. But my point is that I think that this is what we were talking about: the evolution of public acceptability and interest and understanding of these very contemporary ideas and working. So we're moving forward all the time, and that's what it is really for all of us. I remember the first time I heard Jeremiah Symphony of Leonard Bernstein.
Right.
I'm like in 8th grade. To me, it was just cacophony. I could not follow it at all. Of course, now it's like Mozart. So
right.
That's where we're going. All right, we'd better wind this thing down. Wonderful CD. Let's go back to the top here. Great pleasure meeting you. We've taken a while. It takes a while these days to kind of finally get together with musicians and talk about CDs. But what a great CD. Clarinetist Wesley Ferreira, about this 2022 Ravello Records CD release, Into the Green. And as I think I may have mentioned, but I want to, I looked at the cover, it grabbed my attention right away. And then I thought, oh, what am I getting myself into?
Okay.
What I got myself into was a great revelation of people I've never heard of, wonderful composers, and a genre that is, when it's done well and when it's organized properly and intelligently, is beautiful, fascinating music, very clever, very coy, all of that. Wesley, have I missed anything? Shall we run it down now? I think we're about done, huh?
Yeah, well, I really, anytime I can talk about music or talk about art or talk about the projects I'm involved in, it's always, I just feel a lot of gratitude for that, and I really appreciate you reaching out, and sometimes all it takes is someone to be caught by a cover, and then you explore further.
Yeah.
And so I knew this cover was going to be provocative in a way, and it was going to catch people's attention, and then I'm really happy to hear from your standpoint that also the music and everything and that was contained within it really lived up.
Who's the artist that put this together for you? Because I want to just tell you that I've been staring at it for a couple months. Well, actually it goes in the stack, but today in particular I stared at it, and I still wasn't quite clear until you made clear that the cover is exactly about what it's about: electronics.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a real mix of electronics
and
the natural world.
Yeah.
Wow. The folk music, and of course we started talking at the beginning of this interview about my Portuguese heritage and growing up in the musical tradition that I did, which was all kind of folk based in Portugal. So I have a real affinity to folk music. But no, the artist, it was the artist who does the covers in the Ravello records. But this was a vision that I had. I really I essentially said this is what I would like the cover to look like. I really had a strong vision of what I thought the album should look like, so that it reflected the program.
Well, the art department at Ravello copied your intention very, very well. A great success. And that whole Parma family are fabulous. Just music. What a service, giving us this. And I mean by us, the professional music world. That's what I love so much about the Parma group. So much wonderful music that it should and is of interest to all of us in the profession. And then we get, maybe we'll pick up some interest from other people. But fabulous. Okay, your instrument's a great success. I hope you get at least 10% commission on each sale.
Well,
Okay,
well, it
5%.
doesn't quite work
3%.
like that, but the pride of being a part of that is a big part of it.
Yeah, exactly. And the Muse, Selmer Muse, Selmer Paris Muse edition, I guess you would call it, the newest professional level clarinet that they put out. Wesley, thanks very much indeed. Been a great pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Okay.